She was not even worth a refusal. He simply looked through her, the way a man looks through a window at something more interesting on the other side, and kept walking. Those 3 seconds. 3 seconds that she would replay every single night for the rest of what was left of her life. 3 seconds that killed Isla Bennett more completely than any blade, any battle, any wound ever could have. And the worst part, he did not even know it. Alpha King Lutano did not hate her. He did not despise her. He did not stand in the sacred circle and call her broken or cursed or unworthy the way the old stories described the dramatic rejections, the cruel words, the public humiliation. No. He simply looked at her for 3 seconds. And then he looked away. And in looking away, he signed her death certificate. Because in the world of wolves, in the realm governed by sacred bonds and ancient law and the will of the moon goddess herself, an incomplete mate bond does not simply fade. It does not quietly untangle and release you. It does not dissolve with time and tears and distance. It burns. It burns from the inside, slow and relentless, like a fire that has been lit in a room with no windows and no doors. It consumes everything, your strength, your breath, your appetite, your will. The healers have a name for it. They call it the fading. And everyone who has witnessed it agrees on one thing. It is the worst way to die. Isla has been fading for 3 weeks. She is coughing blood into her pillow every morning. She can barely cross her room without stopping to catch her breath against the wall. The bond burns in her chest like a coal that will not go cold. And every night, every single unbearable night, she feels the ghost of it. The echo of everything she was supposed to have, everything the moon goddess had prepared for her, brushing past her like a wind she cannot hold, reminding her with perfect cruelty of everything she has lost. The healers say 2 weeks, maybe less. Leah, her sister, cries when she thinks Isla is sleeping. And Alpha King Lutano sleeps peacefully in the pack house across the courtyard, with Nora Hayes at his side, warm and content, and completely untouched by what his 3 seconds of indifference have done. This is the story of what Isla Bennett does with the time she has left, and I promise you it does not go the way anyone expects. Not Lutano, not Ethan Sullivan, the most feared alpha in the Northern Realm, not even Isla herself. Before we go any further, if this kind of story is what you came here for, hit like and subscribe. Drop your country in the comments right now. Let's see how far Isla's story travels. Now, let's go back to the night it all started. The blood came up thin and pale on her fingers, and Isla pressed them to her mouth as though she could push it back in. Her room in the Bennett cottage was the room she had slept in her whole life. She knew every crack in the stone walls, every groaning floorboard, the exact angle at which the window caught the morning light and turned it amber. She had loved this room once, loved the smallness of it, the way it smelled of dried herbs from the bundles Leah hung above the door, the way the sounds of the pack drifted in like music through the gaps in the shutters. Now it felt like a room where she was waiting for something to end. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. The skin had gone pale over the last 3 weeks, not winter pale, but the kind of pale that lives beneath the surface, the color that appears when a body is quietly running out of time. She could see the blue lines of her veins beneath her wrists clearly now. She could not remember being able to see them before. She stood. It took more effort than it should have. She held the bedpost until the room steadied, then crossed to the window, moving slowly, one hand trailing the wall, and looked out. The Ironvale Pack courtyard spread below her wide and cobbled, torches burning at its 4 corners even in the thin gray light of early morning, the great Ironvale banners moving in slow pulses above the pack house roof. The pack was waking up around her. She could hear it, the distant clang of iron from the training ground, voices low and steady, boots on stone, the particular kind of noise that says a world is continuing whether you are part of it or not. Alpha King Lutano was in the courtyard. He was always at the center of whatever space he occupied. He had that quality, a kind of gravity that drew everything in the room toward him without his having to do a single thing to earn it. He was broad and dark-haired, and carried himself with the easy, settled confidence of a man who had never spent a single moment wondering whether he belonged somewhere. He was speaking to 3 of his senior warriors, his back straight, his voice too low to reach her window, but his authority perfectly legible in the way all 3 men stood. Attentive, ready, slightly leaned in, Nora Hayes stood beside him. Isla had tried, in the weeks since the gathering, to find something to blame in Nora, some edge of coldness or calculation, some evidence of deliberate cruelty. She had searched for it honestly, looking at this woman who had taken the thing that should have been hers, and she had found nothing. Nora was warm and capable and kind in the uncomplicated way that people are kind when the world has never given them a reason to be anything else. She had dark hair and an easy laugh, and she held Lutano's arm the way you hold something you have earned and are not worried about losing. She was not the villain of this story. That was somehow the worst part. Nora laughed now at something one of the warriors said, and Lutano turned toward her with that small, private smile, the one Isla had only ever seen from across a courtyard, from a distance, from the outside, and pulled her closer without looking, the way you pull a door closed behind you. A thing you do without thinking, without noticing. The bond twisted. Isla pressed her palm flat against her sternum. The burning was always there, a constant, low, relentless heat, but in moments like this it flared, sharpened by proximity, sharpened by sight, as though the bond was not content to simply kill her, but needed also to make sure she understood what she was dying for. She heard footsteps on the stairs she knew by sound. The door opened, and Leah came in. Her younger sister moved through the room the way she moved through every room, quickly, purposefully, warmth preceding her like weather. She was carrying the clay cup of medicine that Hannah Foster had left, and she wore the expression she had worn every morning for 3 weeks. The expression of someone who had cried in the night and washed their face carefully and was now doing everything in their power to look like they hadn't. Leah sat beside her on the bed and held the cup out. "You need to drink this. I know. Hannah says if you stop taking it, the deterioration speeds up." "I know, Leah." Isla took the cup. The medicine tasted like bitter bark and something darker underneath, and she drank it in 3 swallows and set the cup down. Leah took her hand. Her fingers were always warm, a thing that had been a family joke their entire lives. How Leah ran warm even in the deepest part of winter. How you could always find her in a dark room by the heat of her. Isla held on. "You deserved to be chosen," Leah said. Her voice was steady. She had clearly rehearsed the steadiness. "You deserved everything. He was blind and foolish, and he is going to spend the rest of his life." "Don't," Isla said softly. Leah stopped. "Don't make it about what he's going to feel later. I don't have the energy for that right now." A long quiet. Below, the courtyard sounds continued. Boots, voices, Nora's laugh, distant and bright, drifting up on the morning air like something deliberately sent. "I love you," Leah said. "I want you to know I would burn this entire pack to the ground before I let you." "I know." Isla squeezed her hand. "I know you would." She looked back at the window, at the courtyard, at the man and the woman who moved through the morning like they had been placed there by someone who arranged the world to look beautiful from a distance. Beneath the grief, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the slow, careful burning in her chest, something else stirred. Something quiet and cold and precise. She did not name it yet. She simply let it sit there, feeling its edges, understanding that it was not the same as despair. Despair gives up. This was not giving up. 3 weeks earlier, the Crimson Moon Gathering had drawn wolves from every pack in the realm to the ancient sacred grounds at the edge of Ironvale territory. It was the holiest night in the wolf calendar. The night when the moon goddess revealed the bonds she had prepared, the golden threads of connection that linked mate to mate, soul to soul, across the distances and silences of an entire year. Every unmated wolf came. Every pack sent representatives. The sacred circle was lit with 100 torches, and the air smelled of pine smoke and the particular charged electricity that comes before something enormous. Isla had walked to the circle with her father, Owen Bennett, quiet and grey-haired, a man who had loved his mate with extraordinary devotion until she died, and had been steadily sad ever since. And with Leah at her side, already fizzing with excitement on Isla's behalf, already certain that this was the year, that this was finally the night, Isla had been more careful with her hope. She had been carefully protecting it for years, keeping it small and contained, not letting it grow too large or too warm, because she had learned early that large, warm hopes are the ones that hurt most when they break. She had worn the grey dress with the silver thread at the collar, practical, fitted, nothing that would make her conspicuous. She had braided her dark hair back from her face. She had walked into the sacred circle and found a place among the gathered wolves and stood quietly and waited. And then Alpha King Lutano had entered the circle. The golden thread had ignited before she had consciously registered seeing him. It was not a gradual thing. There was no slow warmth, no gentle pull, no tentative question. It was sudden and absolute and blazing, a connection so vivid she felt it in the soles of her feet, in the backs of her hands, in the hollow of her throat. It said, "There." It said, "Him." It said, "This is what you have been waiting for with such careful patience. This is the one the moon goddess prepared." Across the firelit circle, his eyes had found hers. She saw the moment he felt it too, a slight stilling, a fractional change in the set of his jaw, the eyes sharpening and focusing with recognition. For 3 seconds, the world held perfectly still. And then something moved across his expression, something that was not cruelty, was not contempt, was simply the closing of a door, and he looked away. He crossed the circle. He extended his hand to Nora Hayes. He announced, in the full, carrying voice of a king addressing his realm, that he had chosen his queen. The crowd erupted. People cried. People cheered. Wolves from 4 packs raised their voices in celebration, and the sacred fire blazed higher. And the bond, the thread that had blazed to life so briefly and brilliantly between Isla and the man who was now pulling Nora Hayes into his arms, stretched and pulled and snapped. It did not break cleanly. Mate bonds never do when they are severed incomplete. The severed end stayed in Isla's chest like a splinter broken off, buried, beginning immediately to fester. She fell to her knees in the sacred circle. The wolves nearest to her stepped back. No one helped her up. She stayed there for a long time, on the cold, sacred ground, with her palms pressed flat to the earth, and her breath coming in ragged pieces, while the celebration continued around her. People moved away. The fire burned. Lutano did not look back. He had not refused her. He had simply not chosen her. The difference felt like a canyon she could not see the bottom of. Back in the present, in the small room in the Bennett cottage, Isla stood at the window until the sun was fully up and the courtyard was busy with the work of the day. And then she made a decision. Not yet. She did not act on it yet. She simply made it. The way you decide to leave a place before you have packed anything, before you have said goodbye, before there is any visible sign that leaving is what you intend to do. The decision happens first. Everything else comes after. She turned from the window. She went to find the old territorial maps in her father's study. The pack library was small and cold, and smelled of old leather and pine resin, and Isla had spent more time in it than anywhere else in Ironvale. She had always been a reader, a learner, a listener. She had grown up absorbing the history of the wolf realm, the way other children absorbed sunshine, quietly, steadily, without calling attention to what she was gathering. She pulled the territorial maps from the flat drawer beneath the north shelf and spread them on the table. She had already read the relevant section of Hannah Foster's old healer manuscripts twice. She had been careful to read them when Hannah was not in the room, because Hannah would have known immediately what she was looking for and would have tried to talk her out of it. The manuscripts were clear. The science of the fading was understood, if not curable. An incomplete mate bond, left unresolved, consumed the rejected wolf from the inside over a period of weeks. There was no medicine that could stop it. There was no ritual that could reverse it. There was only one intervention that the old texts agreed upon with absolute consistency: a new completed bond. If another alpha, a true alpha, a wolf of sufficient power and genuine intention claimed her and completed the bond fully, the broken thread in her chest would shatter and dissolve. The fading would stop. She would live. It was not a common solution, because it was not a simple one. It required an alpha willing to take on the political consequences of marking a dying wolf from another pack. It required proximity. It required power. And it required someone with a reason to say yes. Isla looked at the map. The Ashwood border ran northeast of Ironvale territory, a half-day's walk through the Silver Birch Ridge and down through the Hollow Valley, following the line of the old Thorn Stream until it met the carved border stones. She had been warned about that border her entire life. Every wolf in Ironvale had been, "Do not cross into Ashwood. Those wolves do not welcome strangers. Their alpha answers to no one and takes what he wants, and the pack house there is built from stone that has heard things the rest of the realm doesn't know about." She had grown up thinking of Ethan Sullivan, the way she thought about severe weather. Something real, something to be respected, something you did not walk toward on purpose. But over the last 3 days, alone in the library with the old records and the territorial histories and the reports filed after every border summit, she had built a different picture. Ethan Sullivan had come to the alpha ship of Ashwood at 22 years old, when the previous alpha died with no named heir and the pack of 30-odd wolves was already fracturing. Within 6 months, the fractures had healed. Within a year, the pack had doubled. Within 5 years, it had grown to over 300 wolves, more than most packs accumulated in a generation, because wolves from crumbling packs and unstable territories kept arriving at the Ashwood border, asking for sanctuary, and Ethan Sullivan kept saying yes. He was not a brute. The records made that clear to anyone willing to read carefully. He was the sharpest strategic mind in the Northern Realm, a fact that Alpha King Lutano had been loudly, consistently, furiously aware of for 3 years, ever since the Council of Alphas had convened to consider absorbing Ashwood into Ironvale territory, and Ethan had stood before the full council and dismantled Lutano's proposal, clause by clause, with such precise, patient competence that 3 of the council members had quietly started applauding. Lutano had never forgiven him for that. He had spent 3 years since then trying to isolate the Ashwood pack through political pressure, blocking trade routes, withholding alliance agreements, sending increasingly pointed diplomatic letters that stopped just short of direct threats. Ethan had responded to all of it with the same infuriating, immovable calm. He had not bent. He had not broken. He had simply continued leading his pack with the same quiet, consistent, devastating competence, and Lutano had been forced to watch it from across the border and hate every minute. This was the man Isla was going to walk to. And then she remembered something she had tried very hard to file away and forget. 6 months ago, at the Northern Summit, a public gathering of pack representatives to negotiate seasonal hunting boundaries, she had been there in her capacity as Owen Bennett's daughter and assistant, carrying his correspondence and taking his notes and standing in the background, being invisible in the particular way that had always been natural to her. She had been standing near the east wall of the summit hall when she felt eyes on her. She had looked up. Ethan Sullivan had been standing across the room, 20 feet away, in conversation with 2 of his lieutenants. He was taller than she had imagined from the records, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a scar along the left side of his jaw that no one in the summit hall seemed to look at directly. His lieutenants were talking. He was listening, but his eyes were on Isla. Not casually, not in passing, with the specific, focused attention of someone who has just identified something that interests them and is choosing, very deliberately, not to look away yet. She had held the look for one startled second. Then she had looked away first, her heart going fast in a way that had embarrassed her, because she was already bond aware of Lutano by then, and it had felt disloyal and confusing, and she had spent the rest of the summit carefully not looking at that side of the room. She had never told anyone. She had filed it away under things that do not mean anything and should be forgotten, and she had moved on. Now she stood in the library, looking at the map, and she took that memory back out. He had looked at her the way people look at things they intend to return to. She rolled the map up carefully and tucked it under her arm. She told Leah that evening, after supper, sitting together in the cottage kitchen with the fire burning low and the house quiet around them. She told her simply and completely, the way she did everything without drama, without excessive softening, just the plain shape of the plan laid out for her sister to see, the healer's manuscripts, the border, the name, the logic. Leah's face went through several things in quick succession: shock, fear, a flash of furious protest that she swallowed before it became words. Then something more complicated, and harder to name, the expression of someone who loves you enough to be afraid of what you might be capable of when you have nothing left to lose. "He will kill you before you finish the first sentence," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "You have heard the stories, Isla. You know what he is." "I know what the stories say about him. I have also read every territorial record, every council report, every official correspondence from the Ashwood Pack for the last 5 years. He is not what the stories say. You cannot know that. I know enough." Leah stood up. She crossed to the window and stood with her back to the room for a long moment, her arms wrapped around herself, her shoulders carrying the specific tension of a person holding themselves together by force of will. "You are asking me to let you walk across the Ashwood border alone," she said finally, "dying, to offer yourself to an alpha who has every reason to see you as a political trap. I am asking you to understand why I have to." Leah turned. Her eyes were bright. "There has to be another way. I have spent 3 days looking for another way." Ila's voice was gentle, but it was also final. "There isn't one. The manuscript is clear. A new completed bond is the only intervention that stops the fading. There is only one alpha, close enough, powerful enough, and this matters." Leah motivated enough to say yes. Motivated enough. Leah's voice broke on the words. "You mean because it wounds Lutano?" "Partly. But also because Ethan Sullivan is a man who values what is real over what is convenient. I have read enough about him to believe that." "I have to believe that." Leah crossed the room and took her sister's face in her hands. She looked at her for a long time, really looked, the way Leah had always looked at her, the way that said, "I see you, all of you, everything, and I am not going anywhere." "You come back to me," she said. It was not a question, and it was not quite a demand. It was something in between the thing you say when you know you cannot stop someone, but you need to say it anyway. Isla covered her sister's hands with her own. She did not promise, but she stayed there, holding on, memorizing the warmth of it, the feeling of being loved without terms or conditions, without calculation, without the exhausting requirement of being worth it to someone. She stored it carefully, the way you store a candle before a long, dark journey. She was going to need it. That night, very late, she was lying in her room, unable to sleep, when she heard voices in the corridor below her window. Male voices, low and carrying in the quiet night air. She recognized Lutano's voice immediately. Her body still responded to it, not the warm response of the bond, but its shadow, the ghost of it, an echo that her nervous system had not yet received the message to stop generating. He was speaking to Connor Brooks, his second, a steady, competent man whom Isla had always found unremarkable. She heard her name. She went absolutely still. "The Bennett girl won't last the month," Connor said. Not cruelly, simply factually, the way a man notes that a storm is coming. "Hannah says the bond is deteriorating faster now. Another week, maybe 10 days. A pause. Footsteps, slow and even. "Unfortunate timing," Lutano said. His voice was thoughtful, slightly distant, the way your voice goes when you are thinking about something else. The bond chose poorly. The footsteps continued, faded, turned a corner. The bond chose poorly. Isla lay very still in the dark room. She pressed one hand flat against the stone wall beside her bed. The cold of it grounded her. She focused on the cold. Not cruel, she noted carefully. Not malicious. He had not said something designed to wound her. He had simply said what he believed, that the bond had made an administrative error, that she was an unfortunate byproduct of some cosmic miscalculation, that her dying was unfortunate, the way a spilled cup of water is unfortunate. Something you note, step around, and move on from. She had been dying for 3 weeks. He had used 11 words about it. She lay there for a long time, feeling that truth settle through her. And somewhere in the settling, the cold, quiet decision she had been carrying since that morning became something harder. Something with a clear, definite edge. She would leave before dawn. She would not say goodbye to her father, because her father would try to stop her, and she loved him too much to fight him. She had already written him a letter and placed it on the kitchen table where he would find it at breakfast. She would take the path through the silver birch ridge. She would cross the Ashwood border, and she would find out whether Ethan Sullivan was the man the record said he was. The birch ridge in the hour before sunrise was a still, grey, breathing thing. The trees stood close together and very white against the dark, their bare upper branches making a lattice above her head, through which she could see, occasionally, the last few stars going out. The ground was cold and firm beneath her boots, and the air tasted of frost and pine and the particular mineral sharpness of dawn not yet arrived. Isla walked. She stopped twice. Not because she lost her nerve. Her nerve was the one thing that seemed to have solidified overnight into something hard and unshakable, but because the bond flared as she moved further from Ironvale territory, pulling at her the way a tide pulls at something caught in shallow water. The pain in her chest intensified with each step away, sharp and reaching, as though the broken thread could sense that she was moving away from its source and was redoubling its efforts to drag her back. She breathed through it, counted steps, kept walking. The birch trees thinned as the path descended into the hollow valley. She could hear the thorn stream before she could see it, a low, steady sound in the grey, quiet water moving over stones. She followed it northeast, the way the map had shown, one hand occasionally touching a tree trunk for balance when the ground was uneven, her breath fogging in the cold air. And then she came to the border stones. They were old, older than any living wolf, older than the current pack territories, carved from dark granite and set at intervals along a line that ran north to south through the valley floor. Each stone bore the Ashwood mark, a crescent moon intersected by a single vertical line. Simple, old, permanent. She stood at the border for 30 seconds. She thought about Lutano's voice in the corridor. The bond chose poorly. She stepped over. The Ashwood side of the border felt different, not hostile, not threatening, but unmistakably other. The trees were denser here, older, the path less worn. The light came through differently. They found her in 4 minutes. She did not hear them coming. One moment she was alone on the path, and then 4 wolves materialized from the trees around her with the fluid, coordinated movement of people who had been tracking her since the border stone and had simply chosen now to be visible. They were large, larger than Ironvale warriors, scarred in the specific, unself-conscious way of people who have fought often and regarded their scars as neither shame nor decoration, but simply as information. They wore no pack colors, but they did not need to. They smelled of the forest and the Ashwood stone and the unmistakable overlay of a strong alpha's territory. One of them, a broad man with dark eyes and a stillness about him that suggested he was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any given situation, stepped forward. He looked at her, at the iron veil marks on her coat cuffs, at the pallor in her face, and the careful way she was holding herself, the slight lean toward the nearest tree that betrayed how much effort the walking had cost. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Iron Veil." "Yes," Isla said. "I am here to see your alpha. Take me to Ethan Sullivan." The scout's eyes moved over her again, not rudely, but with the thoroughness of someone conducting an assessment. She met his gaze steadily and let him look. He exchanged a glance with the woman to his left, tall, red-haired, one ear slightly lower than the other from an old scar along the jaw. The woman gave a small, fractional nod. The scout looked back at Isla. "This way." They walked for 20 minutes through the dense ashwood forest. Isla focused on keeping pace, on maintaining the appearance of someone who was not in increasing amounts of pain, on not showing any of the 3 or 4 signs she knew would betray weakness to a pack of wolves who had survived by being very good at identifying it. She kept her head up. She breathed evenly. She noted everything she passed with the quiet, methodical attention that had always been her best skill. The fortress came into view as they crested a low ridge. It was built into the rock itself. Great walls of dark ashwood stone, towers at its corners, torches burning at every gate and window even in the lightning morning. It had not been built to look impressive. It had been built to be impossible to take. Every line of it said, "We have thought carefully about every way you might try to attack us, and we have prepared for all of them." Inside the outer gates, the pack was already awake, and moving wolves crossing the yard on errands, a group of younger wolves running drills in the corner of the training ground. The sounds of cooking from somewhere near the back wall. It was a working place, a living place. Nothing about it was decorative. The great hall was at the fortress's center, and they brought her there. It was a high-ceilinged room of bare stone and dark timber, maps and weapons on the walls, a long table running down its length. At the far end, standing over a spread of papers rather than sitting at the carved chair behind him, was a man who did not need a throne to communicate exactly who he was. Ethan Sullivan. He was taller than she had remembered from the summit. Broader. The dark hair was slightly longer than it had been 6 months ago, falling past his collar, and he wore the simple, functional clothes of a man who had been working since before she crossed his border. Dark shirt, heavy boots, sleeves pushed to the elbow. The scar along his jaw was visible in the torchlight, running from below his left ear to the corner of his mouth, old and silver and settled. He was looking at the papers. Then he looked up. The room was quiet for a moment that went on slightly longer than it should have. Ethan Sullivan looked at Isla Bennett across the length of the hall, the way he had looked at her across the summit room 6 months ago with that same focused, unhurried attention, as though he had time and intended to use it, and said, with a calm that she had not expected, "I know who you are." She had rehearsed this moment for 2 days. She had prepared her words carefully. The argument, the offer, the terms, the logic. She had been ready to convince a hostile alpha that she was not a spy. She had been ready for suspicion and resistance and the grinding work of persuasion. She had not been ready for this. "You know who I am," she said carefully. Isla Bennett, daughter of Owen Bennett, Iron Vale's senior elder. "You were at the Northern Summit 6 months ago." A brief pause. "You were at the Crimson Moon Gathering 3 weeks ago." He did not say anything more than that. He did not elaborate on what he knew about the gathering or what had happened there, but something in the restraint of it in what he deliberately did not say told her that he knew all of it. He came around the table. He was looking at her face, at the pallor and the careful stillness, with eyes that read what they saw without comment. He said, "Sit down before you fall down." And without waiting for her to respond, he picked up a cup from the sideboard behind him, poured water from the clay jug beside it, and crossed the room and put it in her hand. That was all. He did not make a production of it. He did not explain it or call attention to it. He simply put the cup in her hand and stepped back and gave her the space to drink it without being watched. She drank. She felt the cold water move through her, and she was suddenly, furiously aware of how thirsty she had been, without noticing it, and she thought, "He noticed before I did." And that small thing, that small, specific attentiveness, lodged itself in her chest in the exact spot where the bonds burning lived, and sat there quietly and did not burn. "I know why you are here," Ethan said, from a few feet away. He was watching her now, but not the assessing way the scouts had watched her differently. The way you watch something you are thinking about carefully. "I know about the fading. I know about the manuscripts. I know that you have run out of other options, and I am the only calculation that makes sense from where you are standing." "Yes," Isla said. "And you want me to mark you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "And you understand that if I do, I am choosing to antagonize the most powerful alpha in the Northern Realm." "You have been antagonizing the most powerful alpha in the Northern Realm for 3 years. I did not think one more reason would be the obstacle." Something happened in his expression. It was not quite a smile. It was the precursor of one, the adjustment of the face that happens just before. It appeared and was contained and disappeared in the space of 2 seconds. "You have 3 days, he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry? Before I make this decision, I need 3 days. Not to test your strength, you are dying, and we both know it, and testing your strength would be pointless and unkind. 3 days to know your mind, to know that you are not his creature, that this is not a trap dressed up as desperation." His eyes held hers directly. "If you are still here at the end of 3 days and I believe you are who you say you are, I will give you what you need." Isla looked at him for a long moment. She had come here ready to beg if she had to. She had packed her dignity carefully in preparation for leaving it at the door. She had not, in any version of this, she had imagined, expected to be offered 3 days and a fair consideration, as if she were a treaty proposal. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. He called Owen Carter his second, a square-built man with steady gray eyes and the no-nonsense air of someone who has heard every kind of difficult news and remained standing, and gave brief, precise instructions about the guest room and the evening meal. Then he went back to his papers. Isla watched him for a moment. He had already returned to his work, with total focus, as though she had been filed, not dismissed, but filed, noted, and placed, and now neither forgotten nor in the way. She thought, "This is a man who does everything with exactly the amount of attention it requires, and not one drop more." And she thought, walking after Owen Carter through the stone corridor, "I have never met anyone like that before." The first day was the hardest, and the easiest, for entirely different reasons. Owen Carter was not a cruel man. He was not, in truth, even a particularly demanding one. But he was thorough in the same way the fortress was thorough, careful, methodical, leaving no angle unexamined, and the 3 days of evaluation he ran Isla through were designed not to break her, but to understand her. Day 1. The training ground, early morning, with a group of 6 mid-ranking Ashwood wolves who had clearly been briefed to spar with her. Isla went down hard in the first exchange. She had been a capable wolf before the fading quick, if not powerful, with good instincts and better footwork, but 3 weeks of progressive physical deterioration had taken most of her speed and all of her endurance, and the wolf she sparred first simply waited for the 3rd exchange and put her on the ground when her legs gave. She got up. She went down again in the 4th exchange, harder, her ribs connecting with the packed earth with a sound she felt in her teeth. She got up. She went down in the 7th exchange and lay there for a 3 count, her lungs refusing to cooperate, and she thought very clearly and very specifically about Lutano's voice in the corridor. The bond chose poorly. She thought about it with a kind of cold, focused intensity that was almost like energy. She got up. Owen Carter, who had been watching from the wall with his arms crossed and his expression professionally neutral, uncrossed his arms at the seventh rising. He said nothing. But something shifted in his posture, a slight forward lean, the body's involuntary acknowledgement of something it has decided is worth attention. Ethan was on the opposite wall. He had been there from the beginning. She had noted him as soon as she arrived, standing in the shadows with his shoulder against the stone, watching, not directing, not assessing with any visible show of assessment, simply watching, the way a thoughtful person watches something they have not yet decided what to think about. She did not acknowledge him. She focused on getting up every time she went down, and on making each rising look marginally more intentional than the last. That evening, Owen brought her to the map room, a smaller chamber off the main hall, all four walls covered in territorial charts and tactical notes, and sat across from her at the table. "Tell me about Ironvale's eastern border weakness," he said. She blinked. "That is a fairly direct request for pack intelligence." "Yes, you want to know if I will give it. I want to know a lot of things. That is one of them." She thought about it for a moment. Then, "No, I won't tell you things that would harm my pack." She paused. "I left Ironvale because Lutano's indifference is killing me. That does not mean I want the pack itself to suffer. The pack is my father. The pack is Leah. The pack is 1,000 people who looked away at the gathering, and who I do not hate for it, because looking away is human, and I do not have the energy to resent everyone who has ever been a coward for 30 seconds. Owen was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you are good at," he said, listening, noticing. "I have spent 23 years standing in the background of important rooms, being invisible, and I have paid attention to everything I heard. I know the structure of this realm's political relationships better than most of the alphas currently trying to manage them. And what do you want? Not from Sullivan. From your life. If you survive." Isla was quiet for a moment. It was not a question she had given much thought to over the last 3 weeks. She had been somewhat occupied. "I want to be somewhere I am seen," she said finally. "Not celebrated, not made a fuss of, just genuinely seen, by at least one person. I want that to be enough to be going on with." Owen looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said, and closed his notes. The revelation came on the second day. Owen was taking her through the pack structure, not classified information, just the general architecture, who reported to whom, how decisions were made, and he mentioned, in the casual, offhand way of someone delivering information they regard as already widely known, that Lutano had been aware of the mate bond at the Crimson Moon gathering. Isla's hands went still on the map she had been holding. "Aware," she said carefully. "We have good sources at the Ironvale court." Owen's voice was matter-of-fact. Lutano felt the bond form. He recognized it. He had felt the pull before there was a moment, we are told, where he paused, where he had to make a choice. Silence. He had already made a prior commitment, Owen continued. 2 months before the gathering, a political alliance through marriage, the Hayes family controls 3 of the 6 northern trade routes. Nora Hayes was part of the terms. Lutano needed those routes. He had signed the preliminary agreement in the 2nd month of autumn. The map was very still in Isla's hands. "He felt the bond," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. She was aware of making it so, of holding it in place by conscious effort, the way you hold a door against wind. He felt it, and he chose the trade routes. "He chose the trade routes," Owen confirmed, with no particular inflection. "You were not invisible to him, Isla. You were inconvenient." She set the map down. She sat with that for a moment, really sat with it, the way you sit with something that has changed the shape of the room. Not invisible. Inconvenient. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. Not a cosmic error or a bond that chose poorly. A deliberate calculation. She had been weighed against 3 northern trade routes and a political alliance, and she had been found lighter. She thought she should feel worse than she did. She thought the addition of deliberateness to the indifference should make it more devastating. But what she actually felt, sitting at Owen Carter's map table in the Ashwood Fortress, was something closer to clarity. The fog of wondering, of reconstructing, of trying to understand what she had done or failed to do or been or failed to be, all of it dissolved in the face of a simple, clean, specific truth. He had known. He had chosen. She had been the cost he was willing to pay. That was not her failing. That was his. She felt the shape of that distinction for the first time with her whole chest. On the second evening, a knock at the door of the map room. Owen had already gone. Ethan. He came in without ceremony and sat across from her at the table, and he did not make small talk, which she had already learned was consistent with his general approach to every interaction she had witnessed. He got to the point the way you get to a destination directly, without detours taken for the sake of appearances. "I have been watching you for 2 days," he said. "I know. I watched you get up 7 times this morning." She said nothing. "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "All right. When you came across my border," he said slowly, "were you afraid?" She considered this. "Yes." "Of me? Of being wrong about you? Of having read the records carefully and still arrived at the wrong conclusion? Of getting here and finding that the man the documents described and the man actually sitting in that hole were 2 completely different people? And now?" She looked at him directly. "I am still gathering evidence." The precursor to a smile appeared and was contained again. 2 seconds. Gone. "I want to show you something," he said, and turned the nearest map toward her, a territorial spread of the northern routes, the trade arteries, the contested border zones between Ashwood and 3 adjacent packs. "Tell me what you see." She looked at it for a moment. "Your supply line through the Greymarch Valley has an exposure problem. Here." She touched the eastern fork. "If anyone moved a garrison to this ridge, they could intercept 3 weeks of winter provisions without crossing any territory boundary. It is technically legal. No one has done it yet because no one has thought to look at it from this angle." Ethan was very still. "Owen missed that," he said. "Owen was looking at the established threat vectors. I was looking at where I would go if I wanted to cause maximum damage with minimum legal exposure." She paused. "I have spent 23 years standing in rooms where people were not paying attention to me. You learn to look at things from odd angles." Ethan looked at the map. Then, at her. "Where did you learn that?" He said. "I listened. Nobody thought I was listening." The room was quiet for a moment. This, she thought, is what it feels like to be heard. Not praised, not marveled at, not made a performance of. Just heard, received. The information taken seriously on its own merits. No extra work required to make it worthy of consideration. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. She found she wanted to stay in it for a while. The third evening came in quietly, the way significant things often do. Isla had taken to sitting at the ridge at the end of each day, the high stone outcrop at the eastern edge of the fortress walls where you could see the Ashwood Valley spread out below. The forests going dark in layers toward the horizon, the first stars finding their places in the sky. It was the kind of view that had scale to it. The kind that made the things you were afraid of feel, briefly, like the appropriately sized problems that they actually were. She heard him before she saw him this time. Not footsteps the man moved too quietly for that. But a change in the air behind her, a quality of attention, a certain specific weight of presence that she realized with some surprise, already learning to recognize as distinctly his. He came and stood beside her. Not close. Enough room between them that nothing was assumed, nothing was presumed. He looked at the same view she had been looking at and was quiet. And the quiet was comfortable in a way she had not expected. 3 days is almost up, she said. Almost. Have you made your decision? He turned to look at her. The evening light caught his face at an angle that showed the scar clearly, and the lines at the corners of his eyes that came from years of focusing in bright conditions, and the particular quality of stillness he carried everywhere, like a second skin. "I want to tell you something first," he said. She waited. At the northern summit, 6 months ago, across the room. He paused. I saw you. Her breath stilled slightly. I know, she said carefully. I was aware. I do not mean I noticed you, the way you notice a person in a room. I mean I saw you, the way you were listening to the room while everyone else in it was performing for each other. The way you caught things. I watched your face when the Redmore Alpha made his trade proposal, and you registered the flaw in it 3 seconds before any of the council members did. You did not say anything. You wrote a note and passed it quietly to your father. He raised the flaw in his rebuttal. He did, in your exact words, which I could read from 20 feet away. Isla was very still. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I want you to understand that when I look at you, Ethan said, with the same directness he brought to every other thing he said, I am not looking at a dying wolf from Ironvale who needs a mark to survive. I am not looking at a useful strategic move against Lutano, though it is one. He turned toward her more fully. I am looking at the person I watched across a summit room 6 months ago and thought, that is someone worth knowing. And I want you to understand that those are not the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. You are choosing me, she said slowly. Not just marking me. Yes, that is different. Yes, he said. It is entirely different. The valley was going blue-dark below them, the first Ashwood wolves' voices drifting up from the training ground where the evening shift was finishing. And Isla stood on the ridge, with that truth settling through her like water finding its level, and something that had been braced and tight and carefully armored inside her chest, not the bond, something older and more fundamental began very quietly to release. I want to tell you something, she said. All right, I came here because I was dying, and you were the only calculation that made sense. She paused. I have been here for 3 days and I am still dying. I can feel it, still, the fading, even here, even with you nearby. But it is less than it was. Something in your proximity is slowing it. I do not know if that means anything scientifically, or if it is simply the effect of being in the presence of someone who looks at you like you are a real person. I do not know the difference yet. I do not either, he said, but I intend to find out. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Under the new moon, he said. Tonight, if you are willing. No ceremony, no audience. Just you and me, and the decision being made clearly. Yes, she said. Simply and completely and without hesitation. Yes, she said again, and meant it with her whole self. They came down from the ridge as the last light left the sky. In the stone courtyard of the Ashwood fortress, with the torches burning low and the night around them very quiet, and the pack-house lights warm in the windows above, Ethan Sullivan stood before her with his hands loose at his sides, and his eyes holding hers with a steadiness she did not think she would ever stop being startled by. He said, I want to be clear about what this means, for me. Not just the strategic version of it, not just Lutano, not just the political arithmetic. I am choosing you, Isla Bennett, as my partner, as my equal, as the person I want beside me when I am making decisions and when I am getting things wrong and when things are difficult. I am choosing that before I know all of it, before I know how it resolves, because I know enough. Is that something you can receive? She thought about every moment of the last 3 days, the cup of water placed in her hand, the way he had waited for her to finish before responding when she spoke, the map table and the supply route flaw, and the look in his eyes when he heard something he had not expected, the ridge at evening, 2 people looking at the same view. Yes, she said, I can receive it. He closed the distance between them. His hands came up to frame her face carefully, with the same attentive precision he brought to everything, and his eyes asked one last, silent question, and she answered it by not looking away. And then he lowered his head, and his mouth found the side of her throat, and his canines extended, sharp and final, and he marked her. The pain was clean and immediate and real, and she held absolutely still through it, and then the broken thread in her chest shattered. She had not been prepared for what that felt like. She had understood it intellectually, the fading, stopping, the incomplete bond dissolving, but the actual sensation was nothing like she had imagined. It was not gradual. It was instantaneous. 3 weeks of burning, of that low, constant coal of suffering that had become so familiar she had stopped fully registering it, simply stopped. Not faded, not eased, stopped. Gone. The absence of it was so vast and so sudden that her knees went and she would have gone with them, except that his hands caught her, both of them, steady and unhesitating, holding her upright without drama, while the world rearranged itself. And then something else happened. It started as warmth, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the courtyard or the proximity of his body. It started somewhere deep in the center of her, in the place where the bond's burning had lived, and it spread outward through her nerves and her muscles and her bones like sunlight moving through a room when the shutters are opened. It spread to her hands, to her fingertips, to her eyes, and with it came something, a perception, a sudden, overwhelming awareness of the emotional landscape around her, the full interior worlds of every person within range, every feeling and intention and concealed truth suddenly legible to her, like words that had always been written on the walls of the rooms she occupied, but that she had not, until this moment, had the eyes to read. She gasped. It was too much, too vivid, too immediate, too vast. She felt Owen Carter's worry from the doorway above them where he had been watching, and the respect underneath it, layered like strata. She felt the guard's boredom at the outer gate and the homesickness under the boredom. She felt Ethan's steadiness, and beneath the steadiness, like a bedrock under deep earth, something large and warm and very careful, held with extraordinary discipline. The world spun. She reached for his arms. He did not ask what was happening. He did not step back to assess it or call for Owen or try to manage the situation from a distance. He simply closed both hands around her forearms and held on present, steady, wordless, and waited for her to come back to herself. She focused on his hands, on the weight and warmth of them. She used them as an anchor, and she breathed, and the flood of perception gradually, incrementally, found edges, found a volume she could manage. She looked up at him. "I can feel everything," she said. Her voice was barely there. "Everyone within range, what they are feeling, what they are hiding, what they actually mean." She paused. "Is this moon reading?" Ethan said quietly. He was looking at her with an expression she had not yet seen on him, something beyond the usual careful steadiness, something wide open and brilliant. "I have read about it. It has not manifested in the wolf realm for over 100 years. He paused. "It is the rarest gift known." She stared at him. "Lutano," she said slowly, carefully, each word a stone she was placing. "Lutano called the bond poorly chosen. He decided I was not worth the inconvenience of honoring it. He let me die rather than recalculate his political arrangements. Yes, and I am a moon reader. Yes, he discarded the only wolf in the realm who can read the truth beneath every word spoken in her presence. He let the moon reader die for 3 northern trade routes." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. Isla looked at the courtyard around her, the ashwood stone, the low torches, the sky above the walls, with its full complement of stars, and felt something move through her that was not grief, and was not triumph, and was not quite either. It was something cleaner than both. Something that felt like the moment a long illness finally breaks, and you take your first breath on the other side of it, and understand that the world is going to continue, and you with it. "All right," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. She leaned into him the first time, the first deliberate physical claiming of the warmth he offered, and he put his arm around her, quiet and unhurried, and they stood there in the courtyard for a long time without saying anything else, under the new moon and the ashwood stars, while the pack moved in the warmth of the fortress around them, and the fading that had been killing her for 3 weeks continued. For the first time, not at all, Leah came on the 5th day. She arrived at the ashwood border at mid-morning under a white peace banner, accompanied by their father Owen Bennett, who had read the letter Isla left on the kitchen table and had, according to Leah, sat very still for a very long time, and then said, quietly, "Take me to her." Isla met them in the outer courtyard. Owen Bennett looked at his daughter for a long moment, at the mark on her throat, at the color in her face that had not been there 3 weeks ago, at the steadiness with which she stood, and he crossed the courtyard and put his arms around her without a word and held on. She felt him, with her new gift. She felt his fear unwinding the fear that had been coiled tight since he found the letter, the fear that had made the journey here, the fear that was now slowly, carefully, releasing as his hands confirmed that she was solid and real and not dying. Beneath the fear, she felt his love for her, vast and patient and entirely without conditions, and she held that close and let it fill some of the spaces that had been emptied. Leah, who had been standing behind him with her hands pressed together and her eyes very bright, stepped forward when their father stepped back. She looked at Isla. She looked at the mark. She looked at the color in her face. She looked, briefly, over Isla's shoulder at Ethan Sullivan, who had come out of the hall and was standing a respectful distance back, watching. Then she looked at Isla again. "You look alive," she said. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I am." Isla pulled her close. "I am, Leah." They stayed like that for a moment. Then Leah stepped back and wiped her face briskly with the back of her hand and said, "Right. Good. Now, there are things you need to know." They sat in the small room off the great hall that Ethan used for private meetings, Isla and Leah and Owen Bennett, and at Isla's request, Ethan and Leah told them what she had been holding. She had been holding it for a while. Isla understood that immediately. Not because Leah was keeping secrets by nature, but because she had not been certain, had been afraid of being wrong, had been watching and gathering and waiting for the things she had half seen to become clear enough to name. It had become clear in the week since Isla left. There was a wolf in Iron Vale's inner circle someone trusted. Someone with access to the pack's strategic communications and financial records and the schedules of the Alpha's movements who had been feeding information to a third party, not Ashwood. Not any pack Leah could identify. Someone with no visible territorial interest in the Northern Realm, and therefore no reason to be scrutinized. Someone who was methodically, carefully, quietly causing harm from the inside, destabilizing trade agreements, creating the conditions for territorial disputes to escalate, making Iron Vale fractionally but consistently weaker month by month. Lutano did not know. He had no eyes for it. He was a man of great intelligence and considerable strategic capability, but his intelligence ran in straight lines. He was excellent at the threats he could see, and this was a threat that had learned to look like ordinary pack life. Leah did not know the name. She had a face, half glimpsed on the wrong side of a door, and a feeling, a gathering of small inconsistencies that added up to something she could not yet prove. While Leah was speaking, Isla's gift was fully awake. She felt her sister's certainty, not guesswork, not anxiety, something settled and specific. She felt her father's careful weighing of the information. She felt Ethan's focused attention, the strategic mind moving through the implications with the quiet speed she had come to recognize as his particular quality, and she understood something with a clarity that felt almost physical. She had to go back, not for Lutano, not for anything she expected from him or wanted from him or needed him to acknowledge, not for the gathering or the bond or the 3 weeks of dying or anything that had happened between them and been left unfinished. For her pack, for the 1,000 wolves who had looked away at the gathering and who were, underneath that moment of cowardice, her people, for the trade agreements that held livelihoods together, for the families in Ironvale who did not know that someone was quietly moving the supports out from under the structures they depended on. Her gift had been given for a reason, and the reason was not to make her feel powerful. The reason was this. She looked at Ethan. He was already looking at her. He read her face the way she was learning to read rooms, not with the supernatural precision of moon reading, but with the particular intelligence of someone who has been paying close attention. "You want to go back?" he said. Not an accusation, not a question, a plain acknowledgement of what he could see. "I have to. You understand what it means. Walking into Ironvale marked as mine, with me at your side. Yes, Lutano will not receive it calmly. Lutano is the least of my concerns right now. His pack is bleeding from the inside and he cannot see it. I can." She paused. "That is not something I can sit here and ignore." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, then at her. Then he said the thing, the exact, specific thing that cracked something open in her chest, in a way that the bond marking, for all its power and transformation, had not. "Then we go together. Not you go and I will support you from here. Not good luck, and let me know how it unfolds. Not this is your matter and your people, and I will be here when you return. We go together." 2 words. She felt the full weight of them land and settle, and she kept her face composed through it with the same effort she brought to everything, and she made a quiet, private note to herself that she would find a way to tell him, later, what those 2 words had meant. Later. Right now, there was work to do. Leah stayed that night. Their father returned to Ironvale with a message carefully worded, carrying nothing dangerous, requesting a formal council assembly for the following afternoon on a matter of internal pack security. In the evening, after Isla Bennett had gone and Leah was asleep in the guest room, Isla sat with Ethan at the long map table, and they planned. Not a confrontation, not a show of force, something quieter and more specific. A presentation of evidence before the full council, in the presence of every pack elder and every witness that mattered, with enough specific detail to make denial impossible and enough clarity to make the path forward obvious. Ethan laid out the political architecture, who on the council could be moved, who was fixed, how to make the evidence land cleanly, without giving the accused time to prepare a counter-narrative. Isla told him what she would need in terms of physical position, where to stand, so her gift could read the room most effectively, who would be worth watching, what to listen for in the spaces between the formal words. They worked well together. She had known they would. She had felt it in the war room 2 days ago, but there was a different quality to it now. On the other side of the marking, on the other side of everything. They were not negotiating or testing or assessing. They were simply working, as partners work, each contributing what they were best at, each trusting the other to hold their peace without requiring constant explanation or validation. At some point past midnight, Ethan looked up from the map and said, "You should sleep." "So should you." "I will." A pause. "Ethan." She said his name deliberately, testing the sound of it with intent, and watched him register it. "Thank you. For the 3 days. For..." She stopped. "For looking." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for crossing the border." She went to her room. She lay in the dark and felt the new bond whole and unbroken and warm, completely unlike anything she had imagined, less like fire and more like deep water, still and certain all the way down, and she slept properly for the first time in 3 weeks. The Ironvale Pack Hall was a high, grand room built to impress. Marble-veined floors and carved stone pillars and banners hanging from the raftered ceiling in the Ironvale, silver and green, everything designed to communicate the weight and permanence of the Pack's authority. Isla had stood in this room dozens of times in her life, in the background, in the edges, carrying her father's papers, taking notes, being invisible. She was not invisible today. She walked in with Ethan Sullivan at her side, and Owen Carter 2 steps behind them, and 4 Ashwood wolves at the door, and the room went quiet in stages. First the people nearest the entrance, then spreading inward like a stone dropped in still water, until the entire hall was still, and every eye in it was on her. She felt them all. Her gift was fully awake. The full council assembled, 27 wolves, every one of them an interior landscape of conflicting feelings and competing loyalties and private anxieties and careful presentations. All of it suddenly and completely legible to her. It was vast, and it was manageable now. She had spent 2 days learning to filter, to focus, to hold the information without drowning in it. She looked for the traitor immediately. She found what she expected to find, a very particular quality of fear, specific and acute, layered under a controlled surface. She located its source in 3 seconds and filed the information carefully and kept walking. Alpha King Lutano stood at the far end of the hall. Nora Hayes was at his side. She had the expression of someone who has been briefed that something difficult is coming and has prepared a composure for it, and Isla felt, with a faint, passing sadness, the genuine quality of Nora's anxiety, her goodness, her uncertainty, her dawning awareness that the world she had settled into was more complicated than it had appeared. Lutano looked at Isla. He looked at her the way she had wanted him to look at her 3 weeks ago, in the sacred circle, with his full attention, with the recognition of what was in front of him. He looked at the mark on her throat, at the color in her face, at the way she walked, not carefully, not conserving energy, not managing the careful rationing of strength that had been her gait for 3 weeks. She walked as though she owned the ground she was crossing, because she was well and whole and entirely herself, and every wolf in the room could see it. Something happened in his face. She felt it in the room before she read it in his expression, a wave of recognition, of realization, of the devastating and belated understanding of what his 3-second glance across the sacred circle had cost him. He used his alpha voice. It rolled through the room with the weight of absolute command, the kind of voice that expected the world to rearrange itself in response. Isla, you will explain yourself. She felt the old reflex try to stir the particular pull of the mate bond, the compulsion that had always been latent in that voice for her, and found nothing, only quiet. The fading's broken thread was gone completely, dissolved by the completion of the Ashwood bond, and where it had lived there was only calm, clear space. She turned to the council. She addressed the 27 elders, the pack's legal governing body, the people to whom Lutano himself was ultimately accountable under the old law. She did not address Lutano. He was not who she had come for. Honored council, she said. Her voice carried clearly, without effort. I have requested this assembly on a matter of internal pack security. I will be brief, and I will be specific, because I want there to be no room for confusion about what I am presenting and what the evidence supports. She presented it. She gave the council the broad shape first, the nature of the threat, the duration, the estimated damage done, and then she gave them the specifics, the trade agreements that had been subtly undermined, the communications that had been rerouted, the financial discrepancies, the pattern of small decisions that looked, individually, like ordinary pack management, and that, assembled together, revealed a consistent and deliberate strategy. She spoke for 15 minutes. The hall was completely silent throughout. And then she said, "The person responsible for this is present in this hall. I will name them now." She felt the traitor's fear spike to something beyond containing. She named the name. The hall erupted. The wolf in question, a senior aide with 7 years of spotless service and the kind of trusted invisibility that Isla knew something about, was on their feet immediately, voice raised in denial. The controlled surface cracked, the genuine panic underneath, now visible to everyone in the room regardless of gift. Isla let the denial finish. Then she looked at the aide directly and described, quietly and precisely, exactly what the aide was feeling in that moment. Not generally. Specifically the particular texture of their fear, the precise shape of the calculation they were making, the specific memory that was surfacing for them right now in the context of the accusation. She described it in plain language. The hall went very still. 2 council elders looked at the aide. The aide looked at Isla, and something in the aide's face collapsed, not into confession, not immediately, but into the specific helplessness of a person who has been seen through so completely that denial becomes pointless. The council chair called for immediate proceedings. Lutano had not spoken. After the formal session closed and the hall began to empty, and the council's procedural machinery swung into motion around the aide, who had been escorted to the holding chambers with quiet efficiency, Lutano found Isla in the side corridor. He had come alone, without Nora, without Connor Brooks, without the apparatus of his authority. He looked, she noted, older than he had 3 weeks ago. Not physically, there was no change she could point to, but there was a quality to him that had not been there at the gathering, something unsettled and searching that sat strangely on a man who had always appeared to know exactly where he stood. She felt him before he spoke. Beneath the authority, beneath the careful composure, beneath the specific guilt she had expected to find something she had not expected. A genuine bewilderment. The confusion of a man who had made what seemed at the time like a straightforward calculation, and was only now understanding that he had been looking at the wrong set of factors entirely. Isla, he said. She waited. He stopped, looked at the wall, looked back at her. I was wrong, he said. About you, about the gathering, about all of it. She said nothing. I was aware of the bond, he said. I want you to know that I know you know that. I was aware of it, and I made a decision that I believed at the time was correct, political, pragmatic. A pause. I did not understand what I was looking at. I saw an elder's daughter. I did not see. He stopped again. I did not see what was there to be seen. No, Isla agreed. Her voice was not unkind. You didn't. What you did today was for this pack, she said. Not for you. I want to be clear about that. The wolves of Ironvale are my people. They do not deserve to suffer for your decisions or mine. That is why I came back. He looked at her for a long moment. Come back, he said quietly. To Ironvale. We can. No. Simply and completely. Without anger. Without satisfaction. No. I am not the wound you need to close by having me back, Lutano. I'm a real person who very nearly died because you weighed me against a trade agreement and found me lighter. She paused. I do not say that to hurt you. I say it because I need you to understand the actual shape of what happened, not the comfortable version of it, if you are going to be the leader your pack needs you to be. His jaw tightened. She felt the sting of it land. Ethan Sullivan, he said. My enemy. Your rival. There is a difference, though I understand you may not feel one right now. She paused. He is a good man, better at some things than you are. You should consider, at some point, what could be built between these packs if the energy you spend on antagonism were directed somewhere more useful. But that is not my concern today. She felt the sting of that land, too. She felt, underneath it, a quality of genuine consideration that surprised her. He was hearing her, actually hearing her. She had not expected that. She looked at him for a moment. Go back to your pack, she said. Her voice was very gentle now, genuinely so, with nothing performed in it. Fix what is broken. Be the alpha your people believe you are. You have enough capacity for it. I have always believed that, even now. A pause. But let me go. Truly. Let me go, and do not reach for me again. He held her gaze. She felt him understand that this was final, felt the acceptance of it, heavy and real, settle through him. He did not like it, but he understood it. He gave a single, slow nod. She turned and walked back toward the main hall. Ethan was in the courtyard. He was standing near the outer gate, his shoulder against the stone pillar, unhurried, watching the sky the way he watched everything with quiet, total attention. He looked up when she crossed the courtyard toward him. He read her face the way he had from the beginning, not intrusively, not with the gift she carried, just with the intelligence and care of a person who has been paying attention to you for long enough that your face has become a language they understand. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked out of the Ironvale courtyard together, through the outer gates, into the road that led northeast toward the Birch Ridge and the Thorn Stream and the Ashwood border stones, and the sun was behind them and the road ahead was clear. She did not look back. Not once. There was nothing there worth looking back for. Everything worth keeping was walking beside her.